Truth never waits for permission. It never knocks softly and asks if the room is ready. Truth shows up when it shows up raw and unfiltered, before applause, before agreement, before understanding. That's how it has always been. When Jesus came into the world, he did. He arrived to be voted in, validated, or slowly introduced. He arrived carrying truth, and that truth disrupted everything people thought they knew about power, faith, leadership, and God. People say they want truth, but what they usually want is confirmation. They want truth that agrees with them, that flatters them, that protects their position, and does challenge their comfort. Real truth does do that. Real truth confronts before it comforts, exposes before it heals, and demands before it rewards. Look at history closely and you notice a pattern that never changes. The truth always comes first, and acceptance always comes later, sometimes generations later. Noah spoke truth before the flood, and nobody accepted it until the rain was already falling. Moses spoke truth before freedom, and people doubted him while still in chains. Jesus spoke truth before salvation, and people rejected him while standing face to face with mercy. Truth has never been popular on arrival. It is heavy. It is inconvenient. And it forces people to look at themselves honestly. And most people are not ready for that kind of mirror. Truth exposes systems, and systems don't like to be exposed. When Jesus spoke, he didn't just talk about prayer in heaven. He challenged religious leaders, social hypocrisy, false authority, and hollow traditions. That kind of truth does. To get claps, it gets resistance. People in power fear truth because truth removes their masks. It reveals who is real and who is pretending. Acceptance would have required people to change, and change is painful. Acceptance would have required humility, and humility is expensive. Acceptance would have required surrender. And surrender feels like loss before it feels like freedom. The world was ready for Jesus not because the message was unclear, but because the message was too clear. Love your enemy. Serve instead of dominate. Give instead of hoard. Seek God, not status. Those words sound beautiful today because they've been filtered through time, but in that moment they were threatening. Truth threatens lifestyles built on ego. Truth threatens comfort zones reinforced by tradition. Truth threatens identities rooted in pride. So people do what they always do when truth arrives too early for their comfort. They question it, mock it, silence it, or destroy it. This isn't just a religious story. It has a human pattern. Every breakthrough truth in history followed the same road. People laughed at it, fought it, dismissed it, and later claimed they believed in it all along. Truth does wait for majority approval, because if it did, nothing would ever change. Truth is sent ahead to prepare the way, not to blend in with the crowd. Jesus was sent to be accepted first. He was sent to be faithful first. Acceptance was never the mission. Impact was. Here, that's where it gets personal. The reason this truth still makes people uncomfortable is because it hasn't. He stopped operating. Truth still arrives in lies before acceptance. It shows up as a wake-up call, a hard lesson, a painful realization, a voice telling you that the life you're living is to align with the purpose you were given. And just like back then, the first reaction isn't celebration. It is denial. It is excuses. It is anger. It is resistance. People don't reject truth because it is false. They reject it because it demands responsibility. Truth demands that you change how you think, how you act, how you speak, and how you treat others. It demands discipline. It demands sacrifice. It demands courage. That is why people delay acceptance. They say, not now, maybe later, when life is easier, when the cost is lower. But truth does go on sale. It does soften itself to make people comfortable. It remains the same whether you accept it today or fight it for years. Jesus spoke truth, knowing it would cost him popularity, safety, and eventually his life. That alone tells you something powerful. Truth is not measured by how many people agree with it, but by how much it remains true even when nobody does. Acceptance is temporary, but truth is permanent. Crowds change, opinions shift, trends fade, but truth stands when everything else collapses. People often ask why God would send truth to a world that wasn't ready. The answer is simple. Readiness is created by truth, not the other way around. If the world waited until it was ready, truth would never arrive. Truth comes to disturb, to awaken, to separate those who are willing to grow from those who prefer comfort. Jesus' presence forced people to choose, and choice is uncomfortable because it removes neutrality. You either accept truth and transform, or you reject it and remain the same. And even rejection serves a purpose. Rejection reveals hearts. It shows who wants truth for real and who only wants religion as decoration. It shows who is committed to God and who is committed to their image. Truth does to need everyone. It only needs the willing. From a small group of people who accepted it, the message spread across centuries, cultures, and continents, proving that acceptance may be delayed, but it cannot be denied forever. Truth always arrives before acceptance because truth is the seed, and acceptance is the harvest. Seeds are buried, ignored, and stepped on before they grow. They don't look powerful at first. They don't announce what they will become. Given time, they break through the ground and prove that what was once rejected was actually necessary. The same truth that was mocked becomes the foundation people later stand on. The tragedy is that people weren't ready for Jesus. The tragedy is that many still aren't ready for truth when it confronts them today. They want blessings without obedience, change without effort, faith without sacrifice. But truth does work like that. It arrives first, demanding a response. And whether that response is acceptance or rejection determines the direction of a life, a society, of a generation. Comfort is the most powerful enemy of growth, and most people don't even realize they were protecting it. When something threatens comfort, the first instinct isn't curiosity, it is resistance. Not because the message is wrong, but because it is disruptive. Jesus did threaten people with violence or force. He threatened their comfort. He challenged the routines they hid behind, the traditions they used as shields, and the lifestyles they had normalized. And that's why the rejection was immediate. Comfort feels safe, familiar, predictable. Truth feels risky because it demands movement. People like what confirms their habits, not what questions them. Comfort tells you that what you're doing is good enough, that you don't need to change today, that tomorrow will be a better time. Jesus came saying now's the time. Change your heart. Change your direction. Change how you treat people. Change what you value. That message did. Just challenge individuals. It challenged an entire culture built on status, hierarchy, and appearance. Comfort does. You want to be exposed because exposure leads to accountability, and accountability leads to action. When comfort is challenged, excuses are born. People don't say, I reject truth because I am afraid. They say, I need more proof. They say, this is how we've always done it. They say, this feels extreme. They say, maybe later. Those are not intellectual arguments. They are emotional defenses. Comfort is emotional. It's tied to identity. It's tied to pride. It's tied to fear of losing control. Jesus challenged comfort by saying, the greatest must serve. The rich must give, the religious must be sincere, and the powerful must humble themselves. That kind of message feels like an attack when your life is built on the opposite values. Comfort loves predictability. Jesus brought unpredictability. He spoke to the outcast, healed on days people said he shouldn't. Ignored social boundaries and refused to play by accepted rules. Comfort likes boxes. Truth breaks boxes. People rejected him, not because he was unclear, but because he was too clear. There was no middle ground. You could listen and remain unchanged. Comfort hates that. Comfort wants inspiration without obligation, belief without behavior, faith without sacrifice. Look at how people reacted when their comfort was touched. Religious leaders felt threatened because their authority was questioned. The wealthy felt uncomfortable because generosity was demanded. The proud felt exposed because humility was praised. The secure felt nervous because certainty was shaken. Comfort does like mirrors. It prefers filters. Jesus held up a mirror and said, this is who you really are, and this is who you could be. But getting there will cost you something. Rejection is often self-protection. When truth challenges comfort, people feel like something is being taken from them. Their habits, their excuses, their position, their sense of superiority. Comfort convinces people that losing these things is losing everything, when in reality, they are losing what was holding them back. But fear is louder than logic. Comfort whispers, stay where you are. It's not that bad. You will find others are worse. Truth says you were made for more. This pattern did stop in that era. Every time truth challenges comfort, the reaction is the same. People attack the messenger. They question motives. They label the message as extreme, dangerous, or unrealistic. Jesus was called a troublemaker because he made people uncomfortable, but discomfort is often the birthplace of transformation. No one grows without tension. No one changes without pressure. Comfort creates stagnation and calls it peace. People rejected Jesus because accepting him would have required daily effort. It would have required self-control in a culture of indulgence, compassion in a culture of judgment, integrity in a culture of appearances. Comfort prefers shortcuts. Truth requires commitment. Comfort says protect yourself. Truth says deny yourself. That message goes against human instinct, so the instinct fights back. The world wants you ready because readiness requires discomfort. To be ready for truth, you have to be willing to sit with it when it hurts. To let it confront your flaws, to let it strip away false security. Most people don't want that. They want reassurance, not repentance. They want affirmation, not adjustment. Comfort gives them an illusion. Truth destroys the illusion. Even today, people praise Jesus in words, but resist him in practice. They like the parts of the message that feel comforting and ignore the parts that feel demanding. Love sounds good until it requires forgiveness. Faith sounds good until it requires obedience. Purpose sounds good until it requires sacrifice. Comfort allows selective listening. Truth demands full surrender. Comfort also creates crowds. Truth creates commitment. Crowds followed Jesus when he fed them, but many walked away when he challenged them. That tells you everything. Comfort attracts numbers. Truth filters people, and most people want to be filtered. They want to belong without changing. Jesus did. He offered that option. He made it clear that following truth would cost comfort, reputation, and sometimes relationships. Rejection is easier than transformation. It's easier to say no than to rebuild your life. It is easier to criticize than to commit. Comfort thrives on ease. Truth thrives on effort. That is why comfort fights back so hard when challenged. It knows its time is limited once truth is accepted. The danger of comfort is that it feels harmless. It doesn't look like an enemy. It feels like rest, stability, normal life. But unchecked comfort slowly erodes discipline, dulls conscience, and weakens courage. Jesus came to wake people up from that slow spiritual sleep. And people don't like being woken up when they were comfortable. They weren't rejecting Jesus as a person. They were rejecting the disruption he represented. The call to live differently. The demand to choose meaning over ease. Comfort always says, protect what you have. Truth says, risk it for what you were created to become. And when faced with that choice, many people turn away. Not because truth is too hard to understand, but because it is too hard to live. Purpose does arrive quietly, and it rarely shows up in a form people recognize as divine. Most of the time, purpose looks like disruption. It interrupts routines, challenges systems, and shakes foundations people thought were permanent. When Jesus entered the world, he come to decorate existing structures. He came to redefine them. That's why his presence felt dangerous. Divine purpose does to ask for permission from tradition, culture, or authority. It moves forward whether people are comfortable with it or not. People often expect God. Purpose to feel peaceful, gentle, and validating, but real purpose brings tension before it brings clarity. Jesus did. To speak about heaven, he confronted hypocrisy on earth. He did. T simply offer hope. He exposed corruption. He did. T fit into the religious order. He disrupted it. Purpose threatens anything built on false security. It exposes what was never meant to last. And when something exposes weakness, the system reacts defensively. Disruption feels negative to those benefiting from the current order. Religious leaders felt threatened because their influence was questioned. Political powers felt uneasy because control was challenged. Social norms felt attacked because boundaries were crossed. Jesus spoke to people society ignored, healed people tradition avoided, and valued people culture dismissed. That wasn't accidental. Divine purpose often moves toward the broken places first, and that movement creates chaos for those invested in appearances. People confuse disruption with destruction, but they are not the same. Destruction removes without replacing. Divine disruption removes to rebuild. Jesus did tear things down to leave emptiness. He challenged systems so something better could be established. But before rebuilding can happen, foundations must be shaken. And people don't like when the ground moves beneath their feet. Stability, even if false, feels safer than uncertainty, even if truth failed. The problem was never that Jesus lacked compassion. The problem was that his compassion did follow human rules. He healed on days people said healing shouldn't happen. He forgave sins people thought unforgivable. He spoke authority without official titles. Purpose doesn't always respect human schedules or approval processes. It answers to a higher calling. That is unsettling for people who rely on structure to maintain power. Divine purpose also disrupts identity. People have built their sense of worth on lineage, position, and outward obedience. Jesus came saying identity is rooted in the heart. That message shook people deeply. When purpose challenges identity, resistance intensifies. People can tolerate new ideas, but when those ideas question who they think they are, defense mechanisms activate. Pride hardens, ears close, hearts resist. Every major movement of God follows this pattern. Purpose arrives, disruption follows, resistance rises, and only later does understanding begin. People want the outcome of purpose without the discomfort of transformation. They want the results without the process. But purpose does skip steps. It breaks what is misaligned so something aligned can stand. Jesus was called a troublemaker, not because he created chaos, but because he exposed it. Systems that thrive on imbalance fear exposure. Lies survive in silence. Truth disrupts that silence. Divine purpose shines light into dark corners, and darkness always reacts when exposed. The reaction is rarely gratitude. It is hostility. Disruption also forces choice. Neutrality becomes impossible. When Jesus spoke, people could stay undecided. They either leaned in or pulled away. Purpose divides not because it seeks division, but because it demands alignment. You cannot remain the same when divine purpose enters your space. Something must change. Either the heart softens or resistance hardens. People often pray for purpose without realizing what they are asking for. Purpose will challenge relationships that no longer serve growth. It will demand sacrifices comfort does to want to make. It will create seasons of uncertainty where faith must replace control. Jesus embodied that reality. Following him meant leaving old ways behind. Many admired him from a distance, but refused to follow closely. Disruption is acceptable when it happens to others. It becomes offensive when it demands personal change. Divine purpose also reveals priorities. When Jesus spoke about loving enemies, giving generously, and serving the least, he was revealing what truly matters. That revelation unsettled people whose lives were centered on status and self-preservation. Purpose rearranges value systems. What once seemed important loses significance. What once seemed small becomes central. That shift feels like loss before it feels like gain. The world wasn't ready because readiness requires surrender. You can control purpose. You can only cooperate with it. Jesus did to negotiate truth to make it easier to swallow. He spoke it plainly and let people decide. That clarity felt harsh to those who preferred ambiguity. But ambiguity protects comfort. Purpose demands decision. Even now, people struggle with divine purpose because it still disrupts. It challenges how time is spent, how money is used, how people are treated. It refuses to be confined to spiritual language alone. It demands practical obedience. Purpose reaches into daily life and says this must change. That voice is often mistaken for pressure, guilt, or inconvenience, but it is actually invitation. Disruption is evidence of movement. Stillness feels safe, but it produces nothing new. Jesus did to come to maintain the status quo. He came to initiate a kingdom built on truth, humility, and love. That kind of vision cannot coexist peacefully with systems rooted in fear and control. One must give way. Those who rejected Jesus weren't rejecting goodness. They were resisting disruption. They wanted God without upheaval, faith without transformation, belief without cost. Divine purpose does offer that bargain. It offers life, but not without death to old ways. It offers freedom, but not without release of control. Purpose will always look threatening to those invested in comfort. It will always feel radical to those accustomed to routine. It will always seem dangerous to those clinging to power. But history proves that what begins as disruption often becomes deliverance. The very message people tried to silence reshaped the world. Divine purpose does to ask whether the world is ready. It arrives because the world needs it. Readiness is formed through encounter, not comfort. Jesus stepped into disorder to bring alignment, into confusion to bring clarity, into resistance to reveal truth, and the disruption he caused was not a flaw in the mission. It was evidence that the mission was real. Faith was never meant to be a performance, and it was never designed to impress crowds. Faith is movement, obedience, and sacrifice when no one is clapping. When Jesus walked the earth, people admired him, followed him, listened to him, and praised him with words, but admiration was never the goal. Faith that stays in words is comfortable. Faith that moves into action is costly. That cost is where most people step back. They love the sound of truth, but hesitate at the weight of responsibility it brings. Crowds are easy to gather when miracles happen and speeches inspire. Applause comes naturally when people benefit without commitment. But Jesus consistently shifted the focus from excitement to obedience. He healed people and then told them to change how they lived. He taught crowds and then challenged individuals to act on what they heard. Faith in his message was not agreement with ideas. It was alignment of life. That distinction made people uncomfortable. Agreement is safe. Action is risky. Applause gives instant validation without demanding transformation. Action requires consistency when validation disappears. People shouted praise when Jesus entered the city, but those same voices fell silent when following him meant sacrifice. That contrast exposes a hard truth. Many people want to be associated with faith, but fewer are willing to be shaped by it. Faith demands choices that don't always look popular, convenient, or impressive. Action-based faith threatens image. It reveals what people truly believe, not what they claim to believe. Jesus called people to forgive when revenge felt justified, to give when holding back felt safer, to serve when being served felt deserved. Those commands sound noble in theory, but they collide with ego in practice. Applause strokes ego. Action confronts it. Faith without action becomes decoration. It looks good, sounds right, and fits neatly into routines without causing disruption. Jesus refused to let faith remain decorative. He demanded follow through. When he said, follow me, he meant leave behind what you rely on. Leave behind excuses. Leave behind half-hearted commitment. That demand filtered people quickly. Many admired him, Fewer followed him closely. Fewer still stayed when action became costly. Applause fades quickly. Action leaves lasting impact. Faith that acts builds character, discipline, and resilience. Faith that only speaks builds nothing substantial. Jesus measured belief not by volume of praise, but by obedience in private. He watched how people treated the poor, responded to enemies, and lived when no one was watching. That kind of faith cannot be fake for long. People often confuse emotional response with faith. Feeling inspired is not the same as being committed. Jesus stirred emotions, but he never allowed emotion to replace obedience. He knew feelings change quickly. Action forms habits, and habits shape lives. That is why his teachings press beyond excitement into daily practice. Pray consistently, love intentionally, serve humbly, give sacrificially. Those instructions don't generate applause, but they produce transformation. The world wants T ready because it preferred spectatorship over participation. It wanted to watch faith happen, not live it out. Action-based faith threatens comfort because it requires effort even when results aren't immediate. Applause is immediate. Action requires patience. Faith that acts trusts the process even when outcomes aren't visible. That level of trust exposes fear in people who need constant reassurance. Jesus never chased popularity. He let crowds leave when they weren't willing to act. That decision alone reveals the nature of true faith. If faith were about applause, he would have softened the message. He would have compromised demands to keep numbers high. Instead, he spoke truth plainly and accepted rejection. Faith demands loyalty to truth, not loyalty to approval. Action also reveals priorities. What people are willing to do shows what they truly value. Easy to say faith matters. It is harder to reorder life around it. Jesus challenged people to put God above possessions, relationships, and status. That challenge exposed misplaced priorities. Many walked away, not because they disagreed, but because acting on faith required letting go of something they loved more. Faith that acts is inconvenient. It interrupts schedules and rearranges plans. It asks for time, energy, resources. Applause costs nothing. That is why people often substitute words for obedience. They praise loudly to compensate for lives that remain unchanged. Jesus saw through that pattern. He confronted it directly. Words without action are empty. Faith without works is incomplete. Action-based faith also demands courage. Acting on truth invites criticism, misunderstanding, and sometimes rejection. Applause offers protection because it blends into crowds. Action separates. Jesus knew that living out faith would cost his followers socially and personally. He never hid that reality. He warned them. Following truth would be narrow, not popular. Faith that acts does wait for perfect conditions. It moves forward despite uncertainty. People often delay obedience, waiting for clarity, comfort, or consensus. Jesus called people to step forward with trust, not guarantees. That call exposed hesitation. It is easier to applaud from a distance than to step into the unknown. Action sustains faith during hardship. Applause disappears when circumstances change. Faith built on action develops roots that withstand pressure. Jesus prepared people for difficulty, not ease. He taught resilience, endurance, and perseverance. That kind of faith does collapse when excitement fades. The resistance Jesus faced was not about belief in God. It was about obedience to God. Many believed intellectually. Few were willing to act consistently. Action removed excuses. It forces alignment between belief and behavior. That alignment is uncomfortable for people who prefer control over surrender. Faith that acts reshapes communities. It moves beyond personal spirituality into social responsibility. Jesus linked faith to justice, mercy, and compassion. Those demands threaten systems built on inequality and self-interest. Applause could coexist with injustice. Action could not. The message remains the same. Faith still demands movement. It still requires choices that cost something. It still asks for obedience when recognition is absent. Applause is fleeting. Action shapes destiny. When faith becomes action, it stops being a statement and becomes a way of life, changing how people think, speak, give, forgive, and serve, revealing that belief was never meant to stay in the mouth but to be proven in motion. Rejection has a way of making people question their calling. When doors close and voices turn hostile, doubt creeps in and whispers that maybe the mission was a mistake. But rejection has never been proof of failure. In fact, rejection often confirms that a mission is real. When Jesus walked among people, rejection followed him almost everywhere he went. He was misunderstood, doubted, criticized, and opposed, yet none of it altered why he was sent. The mission did pause because people resisted it. It did weaken because crowds turned away. Purpose does not depend on approval. People often assume that if something is truly from God, it will be welcomed easily. History proves the opposite. Goddess missions usually collide with human resistance. Jesus did not adjust his message to avoid rejection. He did not water down truth to protect his reputation. He understood something most people struggle to accept. Rejection speaks more about the hearts of those rejecting and the validity of what is being rejected. Rejection tests commitment. It reveals whether someone is driven by assignment or applause. If approval is the fuel, rejection becomes a stopping point. If purpose is the fuel, rejection becomes confirmation to continue. Jesus stayed focused on what he was sent to do: healing the sick, restoring the broken, teaching truth, and pointing people back to God did not stop when opposition increased. The mission remained constant even as resistance grew stronger. Many people quit when rejection appears because they confuse resistance with disqualification. They assume closed doors mean wrong direction. But often rejection is resistance from systems that feel threatened. Truth disrupts comfort. Light exposes darkness. Change unsettles power. When Jesus confronted hypocrisy and injustice, rejection was inevitable. That rejection was not a sign to retreat. It was evidence that truth was hitting its target. Rejection also refines focus. It strips away distractions and false supporters. Crowds disappeared when Jesus refused to entertain comfort-driven faith. What remained were those willing to stay committed regardless of outcome. Mission thrives in clarity, not popularity. When rejection removes noise, purpose becomes sharper. Jesus did chase people who left. He invested in those who stayed willing to learn, grow, and endure. The mission was never about being liked. It was about being obedient. Obedience does not require agreement from others. It requires faithfulness to the assignment. Jesus modeled that obedience even when it led to isolation. Loneliness did not invalidate his mission. Opposition did not weaken it. Silence from supporters did not cancel it. Purpose continues even when encouragement disappears. Rejection exposes expectations. People often enter purpose expecting affirmation. When affirmation does decome, disappointment grows. Jesus had clarity about his mission, not expectations of acceptance. He knew rejection would come. He prepared his followers for it. He told them they would be opposed, misunderstood, and rejected. Yet he also told them to continue. Mission requires endurance more than excitement. There's a difference between rejection of the messenger and rejection of the message. Many people rejected Jesus, not because he lacked truth, but because truth demanded change. That rejection did not make the truth less true. Purpose is not validated by response. It is validated by alignment with God as will. Jesus did not measure success by numbers or praise. He measured it by faithfulness. Rejection can feel personal, but mission keeps perspective. Jesus did not internalize rejection as identity. He did not allow opposition to redefine who he was. He remained rooted in his calling. When people attempt to silence purpose, it is often because purpose is effective. Resistance is not random. It shows that something meaningful is happening. The greatest danger is allowing rejection to rewrite direction. Many abandon purpose prematurely because rejection feels like failure. But mission often advances through resistance. Every step forward invites pushback. Growth attracts opposition. Jesus continued even when rejection escalated into betrayal and violence. The mission did not change even when the cost increased. Rejection also strengthens resolve. It forces reliance on God rather than people. When approval fades, dependence deepens. Jesus spent time in prayer, not popularity contests. He withdrew to stay aligned, not to escape pressure. Rejection pushed him closer to purpose, not away from it. People often misunderstand mission as success without struggle. But struggle is part of assignment. Resistance reveals seriousness. If purpose were insignificant, it would not be challenged. Jesus' mission threatened systems, traditions, and power structures, so rejection intensified. Yet the mission outlasted the rejection. What people tried to stop became the foundation of transformation across generations. Rejection does not cancel mission because mission originates beyond human opinion. It begins with calling, not consensus. Jesus did not ask permission to fulfill purpose. He moved with authority rooted in obedience. Even when his path led to suffering, the mission remained intact. Purpose is not canceled by hardship. It is proven through it. Many people allow rejection to silence them. Jesus allowed rejection to sharpen clarity. He spoke with even greater focus. He taught with deeper urgency. He served with unwavering compassion. Resistance did not harden his heart. It strengthened his resolve. The mission continued even when it looked defeated. What appeared like loss became victory. What seemed like rejection became fulfillment. Purpose is not always recognized in the moment. Often it is understood later. Jesus trusted the process even when the process included pain. Rejection cannot cancel what was divinely assigned. It can delay recognition, but it cannot destroy purpose. Mission operates on a higher timeline. Human rejection is temporary. Divine purpose is enduring. Jesus' life proved that truth outlasts opposition. The lesson remains. Rejection is not a signal to stop. It is often a signal to stay focused. Purpose demands perseverance. It requires faith that does not depend on applause. The mission continues whether people cheer or resist, whether doors open easily or close forcefully, whether understanding comes quickly or is delayed, because assignment is not sustained by acceptance, but by obedience. And obedience does not expire when rejection appears. Control gives people a sense of safety, even when that safety is false. When people feel in control, they feel powerful, secure, and justified. When control is threatened, fear surfaces immediately. Jesus represented a kind of authority that could not be managed, predicted, or manipulated. He did not answer to human systems, titles, or expectations. That made people uneasy. The world resists what it cannot control, because control gives the illusion of ownership, and truth cannot be owned. From the beginning, people tried to figure Jesus out so they could categorize him. Was he a teacher, a rebel, a prophet, a threat, a healer, or a political figure? Labels are tools of control. Once something is labeled, it feels manageable. But Jesus refused to fit neatly into any category. He healed when he wanted, spoke when he wanted, moved where he wanted, and answered questions in ways that disrupted agendas, that unpredictably threatened those who relied on structure to maintain dominance. Systems depend on control to survive. Religious systems relied on rules, rituals, and hierarchy. Political systems relied on order, fear, and authority. Social systems relied on boundaries and status. Jesus challenged all of them without asking permission. He healed outside approved channels. He forgave without consulting leaders. He spoke with authority without credentials. That kind of freedom exposes how fragile control really is. People resist what they cannot control because control protects comfort. If something can be controlled, it can be adjusted, delayed, or silenced. Jesus could not be controlled, so resistance became the strategy. When people cannot manage truth, they attempt to suppress it. When they cannot shape the message, they attack the messenger. Control lost becomes hostility gained. The teachings of Jesus removed leverage from those in power. He taught that God listens to the humble, not just the elite. He taught that mercy outweighs ritual. He taught that love fulfills the law. Those teachings weaken systems built on exclusivity and fear. Control thrives when people believe access is limited. Truth removes gatekeepers. That is dangerous to those whose influence depends on controlling access. The world prefers a controllable God. A God who fits expectations, supports existing systems, and stays predictable. Jesus revealed a God who disrupts plans, overturns tables, and redefines power. That revelation was unsettling. A God beyond control means surrender is required. Surrender threatens ego. Resistance protects it. People tried to trap Jesus with questions, hoping to corner him into a mistake. Control seeks loopholes. It looks for angles to manipulate outcomes. But Jesus responded with wisdom that exposed motives rather than satisfying curiosity. He refused to play games. Control failed because truth does not operate on human bargaining. Even miracles threaten control. Healing gave power back to the marginalized. Forgiveness restored dignity to the rejected. Hope disrupted despair that systems had normalized. Control relies on people staying in their assigned places. Jesus disrupted those assignments. When the powerless gain freedom, control loses grip. Resistance often hides behind logic and tradition. People said things like, "This is not how it is done," or "This breaks the rules." Those statements are rarely about truth. They are about maintaining control. Jesus challenged tradition not to destroy faith, but to restore it. Control masks itself as protection, but often it is preservation of power. The inability to control Jesus created anxiety. Anxiety leads to aggression. When people feel the influence slipping, they react strongly. That reaction was not about Jesus being wrong. It was about him being uncontrollable. Freedom threatens systems that thrive on dependency. The same pattern continues. People are comfortable with beliefs they can manage. They resist truths that demand surrender. Jesus demanded trust over control. He called people to follow without knowing every step. That invitation feels reckless to those who need guarantees. Control seeks certainty. Faith requires trust. The world resists what it cannot control because control promises security without surrender. Jesus offered security through surrender. That exchange felt too risky. People wanted assurance without letting go. Jesus offered peace, but not on their terms. Peace required release of control. Control also shapes identity. People define themselves by roles, rules, and status. Jesus redefined identity through relationship with God. That shift removed external validation. Control loses value when identity is rooted internally. People who depend on status resist messages that level the field. Jesus showed that authority flows from alignment, not position. That truth unsettled leaders whose power came from titles. Control depends on hierarchy. Truth dissolves hierarchy by exposing character. People resisted because control was slipping from their hands. The crucifixion itself was an attempt to regain control. Silence the voice. End the disruption. Restore order. That act revealed how far resistance will go when control feels threatened. But even then, control failed. Purpose moved forward. Truth outlasted suppression. Does not stop what it does not own. The message survived because it was never dependent on permission. People realized too late that control was an illusion. Truth moves independently of approval. The world still resists what it cannot control. It resists voices that challenge norms. It resists movements that expose injustice. It resists faith that demands obedience over convenience. The reaction remains the same. Criticize, label, suppress. Jesus never tried to gain control over people. He invited transformation. Control manipulates behavior. Truth changes hearts. That difference matters. People feel losing control more than they feel losing truth. The message remains uncomfortable because it still demands surrender. It still removes excuses. It still challenges systems built on power and image. Control offers predictability. Truth offers freedom. Freedom requires courage. People will always resist what they cannot control because surrender feels like loss. But in reality, control costs more than it protects. Jesus showed that letting go leads to life. The world wasn't ready then, and it often isn't ready now, because readiness requires release, trust, and humility, and those qualities threaten control at its core.